So we want to hear from our communities, and I told you I was going to do it alphabetically, but I'm also going to let y'all have a little bit of leeway. If Appleton's ready, we'd like them to start, but we're going to move the mic into the middle. What we'd like you to tell us in 3 or 4 minutes, I'm not going to put a clock on you, but at the most, is what your community, a little bit about your community, what your community is facing. What are the challenges that you've got now? And if you'd like to start, Wisconsin, come on up. Whoever from your place, and there we go. No. Anybody from Wisconsin speaking today?
They're pointing at me.
I know. I saw that.
So I hope I represent Wisconsin well.
So speak loudly so they can hear you in the back.
All righty. Can you folks hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because we're going first, I'll steal the 100% guaranteed challenge question, and that's or issue, and that is talent. Our unemployment rate is less than 4%. Last I looked at it was like 3-4. We're a heavy dominated manufacturing quartile in the state. Roughly 24-25%, depending on the community, is in manufacturing. And to Ted's earlier comment, in that sector, we've seen surveys in some communities that within the next 5 to 8 years, 50%, some of those numbers are just staggering, 50% of their senior skilled workforce is rolling out to retirement. Now on the other side, the workforce development is doing some staggering things. There are alliances being formed. There's a healthcare alliance, which is all the healthcare providers. There's a manufacturing alliance. There is now a fledgling IT alliance that is basically the private sector hooking up with a senior project manager who then works with the educational community, workforce development, and others around developing a pipeline of talent. So it's grow your own. Everybody is stealing everybody, so recruiting goes on. And then the last piece, which is just now starting to get some conversation, is sort of the dirty word, automation. And of course, automation's been going on since Henry Ford, but really, really purposeful, strategic, heavy capital investment. Companies are just now starting to talk about that's not on their radar or what they're about to think about. It's what they're actually investing in. So companies are not going to wait till they run out of people. And so it goes to, I forget if it was Andy's comment or earlier speaker, but the strategy for the development community might be to run at that and become a center of excellence around whatever our brand of manufacturing is and automation. So enable the companies to basically become very, very good at automation. Now, switch gears, a challenge. The challenge is whenever you have a lot of really well-intended folks running at the solution, you create unintended dysfunctional things. So what I see, and this is my personal observation, a lot of silos. People doing really good work, but really no glue, no string, no apparent deficiency. And what that does in the marketplace is it creates among the consumer, now the employer, that it's not very strategic and that it is kind of haphazard. So we're working on trying to figure that out. And then the last thing I'll reference is the importance of information. And I think we all do a fairly good job of looking retro and saying that's what happened, and maybe projecting that's what happened into the future. But I think we have to get way, way, way better at gathering information, and not just data, events like this, but opportunities to start looking really far forward. How many in the room do that? For those of you who do that, you have a great competitive advantage, I think.
Thank you.
Thank
Perfect.
You.
Thanks. Cedar Rapids? Yeah. Tag team.
We're tag teaming.
Tag
That's right.
team. All right. Cool.
Okay. Just hold down some. Can you hear us? Okay. I'm Jasmine Ellen Wyatt. I oversee economic development for City of Cedar Rapids. And so we kind of assumed everybody was going to talk about workforce, so we're not as focused on that just because it's sort of the problem everyone's having right now. And to the question actually about incentives, just as a side note, we were one of the finalists for Toyota. They weren't concerned about workforce either because they assumed that they can probably gather existing industries workforce and not so much looking at available, so for what that's worth. So Cedar Rapids, we've been pretty fortunate. We actually had a pretty massive flood in 2008 that provided us a silver lining of this huge injection of federal dollars that then resulted in a lot of private redevelopment efforts as well, and that happened right during the time of the recession. So that is something that while it sounds like on the surface certainly, it really was a horrible thing for a lot of people, it served as sort of a catalyst for growth within our community, and we had a lot of smart leadership that seized that opportunity and used it as a way to redevelop our core, to look at reestablishing affordable housing in the core, those types of things. We're also very fortunate in that we have a pretty diverse industry cluster base, so we have a very strong ag and bioprocessing economy. We have a large aviation, aerospace, and defense presence with Rockwell Collins that employs about 8,000 engineers in our city, a lot of life insurance and real estate. So again, we've been very fortunate there. So I think from the things that we're doing well, I think that we're just really making sure we're taking care of our community, being responsive to employers. We're certainly aware of what our competitive advantages are as a city, and so as we try to do targeted recruitment efforts, we are very specific to things we know we do well versus things that maybe we're not cut out to be, but kind of wish we were. So we still have a lot of room to improve on those things, but I think we've done fairly well. We have a 3.4% unemployment rate. We, comparatively across the country, we're doing fairly well. So the area of challenge that we wanted to focus on was something that's more of a chronic issue, and that's where Les is going to take over.
Yeah, notice I'm from the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation. I get to talk about the black cloud. She got the silver lining. And I want to deal with two issues that are challenging. One is economic change. This year alone, two of our major employers, both large industries, homegrown in Cedar Rapids, have been bought out by national concerns. Just a reminder to all of us that what got us here won't keep us here. The other concern, which is I think even more important, is a concern about equity. We are beginning to be able to document and see concentrations by race and by poverty in certain neighborhoods in Cedar Rapids. And that has some pretty dire consequences as we think about the future. First of those is I think we see some core neighborhoods that are at the tipping point of not being able to provide safe and secure environments to raise families. We see that 50% of the kids in the Cedar Rapids Community School District are on free and reduced lunch. And those kids are going to need a different kind of support from us if they're going to be successful both in school and thereafter. We see unemployment among people of color at twice the rate of white citizens of Cedar Rapids. So beneath some of those aggregate statistics we see some real disparities. And we see the poverty rate among people of color 5 times higher than the community average. White home ownership is twice as high as it is for people of color. And what this reminds us is that it's really important for a place-based funder like us and a community and people working together is to remember, to borrow from a phrase coined by our colleagues at the Funders Network and the Federal Reserve, that our job is to be able to bridge the arc of opportunity with the arc of prosperity.
There you go. Thank you. Danville? Carl, do you know who's going to? There we go. Corey's going to do it. Sorry.
My name is Corey Bobay. I'm the Assistant Director of Economic Development for the City of Danville. For those of you who took the River District tour this morning, I'm sorry you have to listen to me all over again and probably hear some of the same phrases and conversations. As you may know, now visiting our city, we were a community that was centered around textiles and tobacco manufacturing. Textile manufacturing and tobacco. Our largest employer for a number of decades was Dan River Inc., a textile manufacturing firm. They had millions upon millions of square feet of manufacturing facilities within our community. I want to lead with this example because during their heyday, they were known to employ about 12,000 people, if not more, just within the city of Danville. So if you have a community that's a little over 50,000 people, that's 20% of your population whose livelihood rests upon this one organization. They were a powerhouse within the community and government decisions. For instance, an interstate was being proposed to run through our community, which we all know with interstates come a wide range of opportunity, economically speaking. However, this group petitioned. They did not want the competition coming into the community to still or compete with the workforce, with the labor costs, and with the educational opportunities, and so, of course, petitioned it to go elsewhere. So that's a huge blow and a huge hit. So obviously there's a culture of, and I'm sorry if any of you guys fit the bill within this room, but old white men making decisions for our community. And so those, of course, created challenges that we've really had to acknowledge and begin to overcome. So how have we overcome it? Or should I say, before I go into overcoming it, the exit of these major industries within our community spun a large number of issues. So when the industries left, textile and tobacco left, that created a decrease in of population by about 10,000 people over a decade. So you look at 10,000 people, the demographics of the 10,000 people, that was about most of our middle class looking for jobs elsewhere because they were not available within the community. So that was one challenge, lack of jobs and job creation. You did not need an education in order to work within the mill industry, and so you had, who was left, lower income, low skilled workers. You did have some upper employment and wealthier folks within the community still. That means with the exit of 10,000 people, you had an abundance of housing. We were talking about 1950s homes, so give me your avocado and harvest gold bathrooms. We do have an abundance of those, and how do you revamp them to attract the newer generation and young families? In addition to that, our public school systems took a major hit with middle-income families leaving. That means you're left with wealthier families sending their children to public schools. Private schools. We're blessed with a number of private schools within the community. However, that leaves a large portion of our public school students as lower income families that may not have that support structure at home in order to know how to behave, how to do your homework. And so our public school system, I think, is one of the major drivers in if or when families move to our community. And so we are having a lot of conversations around how to revamp this public school system. In addition, if you couple poverty with the low educational attainment, that equals a lot of health issues. If you look at our annual report card that the Danville Regional Foundation puts out, there are a number of health and wellness issues related to strokes, obesity, and you name it. So those are so many major issues that we are trying to tackle. Now, on the bright side, with every challenge comes an opportunity. So, of course, with lack of job creation, what do you need to do in order to attract the companies into our community? And we've all talked about this all morning. That's the creation of workforce training programs. How do you train those who are within your community who may have lost jobs, or those who are within the school systems, in order to gain the modern day skill sets, not the basic skill sets, in order to achieve a higher quality of life. And so we have partnered with the community college as well as the public school system in order to launch the first real cohesive training program. So we took a look at the industries that were showing growth over the next 15 years, and those would be our targeted industries. The first workforce training tool that we put together was focused on precision machining. So this is not you're going in welding, you're in a dirty shop or on a dirty shop floor. This is very technical, highly skilled training that's focused towards the aerospace and automotive program, as well or industries, as well as medical device manufacturing. Children within the public school systems and high school can now start within this specialized training through precision machining in order to gain a NIMS 1 certification and a year's worth of community college credit or college credit. They can then transfer into the community college system where they're in 1 year will receive their 2-year degree as well as various certifications that the industry do require. And then they do have the opportunity to transfer into a 3rd-year program that's housed here. At some point, I guess Julie is going to come up and tell you exactly what happens within the walls of the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research, but one component is workforce training. So right behind this program is the Gene Haas Center for Integrated Machining, where students now have the ability to learn how to operate on an actual manufacturing floor. It's a flow cell model, so they learn how every decision that they make, from picking out the right tool to pushing a button to managing the plant floor, how that makes an impact on the bottom line of that company. This program has been planned and implemented over the past 5 years. It's not cheap. We had to invest as a community over $30 million in putting this information or putting this program together. However, we've seen quite a bit of success and interest from especially UK and Europe-based industries to come into our community. We know that we can't only rely on precision machining programs or industries, so we are now in the process of replicating or planning to replicate this program, but within cybersecurity and IT. Additional things that we're doing well, for those of you who went on the River District tour earlier today, obviously we've been talking a lot about millennial and young family recruitment to the area. Well, we've had a beautiful historic downtown area, the Tobacco Warehouse District area and the Central Business District, that had seen a lot of vacancies over the years and deterioration of the buildings. And so we've invested from the public sector about $34 million in renovating buildings, of course improving streetscape improvements or streetscapes, adding lifestyle amenities that would help make us more attractive and that people would want to choose to live within our community. As I'd mentioned earlier, there were a few people making a lot of decisions for the region for decades. There are strategic efforts in place in order to change that, become a more inclusive community, a more diverse community. The Danville Regional Foundation recently launched I guess about a year ago, a Leadership Connection, or 2 years ago, Leadership Connections group that pairs young professionals of diverse backgrounds with existing leaders within the community, so we can get training and have the connections and the mentoring in order to become the next generation of leaders. Also, if Jennifer Gregory is here somewhere, who runs Middle Border Forward, I would say please talk to her, because she has been running this program for about a year and a half, which focuses on inclusivity, civic engagement within the community and region. And also something we've done successfully would be investing in infrastructure, specifically broadband infrastructure. We talk about everyone can, the trend is now going to people can want to, or people would like to work from wherever they want to live. So how do you do that? You have the infrastructure readily available in order for them to communicate back to wherever their headquarter offices are located. I think that's it.
Thank you. Hickory? Mick, you got the, didn't get your mouthpiece? I don't know.
My name is Mick Berry. I'm the county manager of Catawba County, Hickory being our largest municipality. Just a quick profile. Catawba County is 155,000 people. We're basically the hub of a 350,000 metro area, a lot of small cities, very familiar to, sounds like your jurisdictions. City of Hickory of 40,000 being our biggest municipality. And we're about 50 minutes from the Charlotte Douglas Airport, have I-40 and Highway 321 and Highway 16s running through our community, so good transportation infrastructure. Long time Manufacturing history, as a matter of fact, I bet everybody in the room knows what comes from hickory. What? Furniture. Furniture, right? No, maybe we aren't known for furniture. I thought we were always known for making furniture. Maybe we're not. Okay. And that's still going strong. As Alan mentioned, we have 1,000 job vacancies right now in our metro area for furniture makers. So it's actually an inhibitor to our growth right now. And we'll talk about that in a second. We've had a lot of success in the last 20 years in technology, specifically fiber optic cable. At one point in time, about 40% of the world's fiber optic cable was made in the Hickory area. And that's tailed off a little bit, but those companies are still present and doing well. Then with the initiative of our great economic developer, Scott Millar, we got into the data center business and have had success there. As a matter of fact, Siri lives in Catawba County in Maiden, North Carolina. Don't try to go see her, though. You can't get past those gates. They are very closed and unfortunately not that involved and supportive of the community. Sorry, Scott. I know that's not on your speech, but it's the fact. We also have had a pretty good play in automotive component manufacturing. So challenges that we see, same as what you all have talked about already, anemic population growth, workforce challenges, drug abuse. We cringe every time somebody does a study in North Carolina about the top places of opioid abuse because we are always on the top of that list, and old housing stock. Some of the initiatives that we're excited about and are making progress, the City of Hickory 3 years ago passed a historic bond referendum and are in the process of designing and building a downtown city walk which will link Lenore-Ryan University into the downtown, and a river walk which will provide public access to Lake Hickory, the Catawba River. All of our municipalities are actually in the process of various projects and stages of improving their downtowns and what I would call their curb appeal. One exciting initiative from the county standpoint as it relates to education is a business and county government partnership that was formed within the last year and a half. Has garnered a lot of financial and I would say mind support from the business community, bringing their talent to the table. The initiative is focused on getting technology in the hands of all of our students, making sure our teachers are trained to use that technology and have the resources to teach with it. Work-based learning, we actually have led the state of North Carolina with the number of internships that we've had in Catawba County for the last couple of years. But 700 internships for 22,000 students doesn't seem like we're where we need to be on that. So although we're leading the state, we need to ramp that up. And then character education, starting in elementary school with some of the basics. We've had a number of Leader in Me program elementary schools, and we're taking that countywide or a version thereof. And then as they transition into middle school and high school, taking that into job skills training. And then the last component being mid-career educational opportunities, continuing to offer those. All of those things are being done by various communities. Sometimes you all, or some of them you may be doing, but we feel like the bundling of them all together in a single package and being able to market and talk about that will be a differentiator for us. And having been in the community for over 27 years now, I would say that I have never seen the Hickory-Catawba County community as united in terms of both the private and the public sector leadership in the focus and the goals that we're accomplishing. Thanks.
Macon, Georgia. There we go.
Hey, I'm Josh Rogers. I work for Newtown Macon, which is our downtown development nonprofit. I know everybody's getting tired and we're running over time, so I'm going to be brief, but I want to set a little context. So our story begins in 13,000 BC, and the Bering Land Bridge has brought Asian humans over to America. Well, they made it all the way down to the banks of the Ocmulgee River, And so the site we're making is one of the only sites in North America that's been continuously inhabited by humans for 15,000 years that we can document. So when the white men finally showed up a couple of years later, Macon became a real hub for transportation, agriculture, banking. At one point, the longest telegraph lines and the longest passenger rail lines in the world were owned by Maconites. So it was the early 1830s. And they left us with this incredible legacy of beautiful historic architecture. So we've got over 6,000 buildings that are listed on the National Register, more than almost anywhere in the Southeast. And so it's an incredibly beautiful place. That said, the story of decline is the same as almost anywhere else. The first mall opened in 1968, second mall in 1973, transportation technology changes, suburbanization kills downtown. One of our founders, who just so happened to be a dean at Averett before he moved to Macon, said that by the early 1990s, the entire community was stagnated by dying downtown. So 1996, the Peyton Anderson Foundation got a group of community leaders together and committed to revitalizing downtown. After touring the country, they came back, they formed a nonprofit organization, which is Newtown Macon, and charged us with really two things: revitalizing downtown and developing a river walk that could turn our river from a liability into an asset. So some of our more recent success, we have 11 miles of riverfront trail that's in place. We continue to build more every year. We've also recently consolidated our city and county governments, which has been an incredible advantage in efficiency and being able to work together. I really can't overstate how pivotal consolidation has been. We also just launched in July our first business improvement district for downtown Macon. That's been a goal for 20 years. So I think that you're seeing a significant shift in property owners being willing to invest their own tax money in additional services, hoping for continued improvement. Just some quick statistics about downtown in particular. We've gone from 12 lofts in the year 2000 to 600 today. And most of those have been constructed in the past 5 years. We've also gone from 50% storefront occupancy to 70% storefront occupancy just in the past 5 years. So this momentum is really recent, but it's tangible and measurable. I'd say some of our weaknesses would be that we've still got a significant amount of blight in historic neighborhoods. We had Smart Growth America come in, and they say every time we build anything greenfield, we're losing money. We're charging less property tax than it actually costs to service. That's sort of a systemic issue. That's going to be a real problem going forward. So downtown's surging, producing this huge profit of property taxes that can be used to help schools and government. But then we're spending all that money on continuing to do greenfield development through our planning and zoning practices. I'd also say that we've got some weaknesses in ensuring broad benefits from downtown revitalization for all of our citizens. And we struggle with some of the same political challenges of allocating our resources strategically. A couple of weaknesses that seem like they're shifting into opportunities are tourism and office growth in downtown. We haven't really built a tourism market, and we haven't had a lot of success in increasing office occupancy and rates, but those two seem to be changing really quickly. Sort of a ratification for what's happening in Macon right now. Just before our trip, Thrillist posted an article, the Millennials Know the website, that Macon is the new version of Chattanooga or Birmingham, which we were really proud about. So it seems like we're getting some of that third-party validation that we're on the right track and great things are happening, but we've got a lot more work to do, and I'm anxious to learn more from all y'all. Thank you.
So Michigan City, Indiana, and the northwest part of Indiana. One region, I believe, correctly.
Yeah, I'm going to move this. Okay, so I'm Leah Conradi. I am from Michigan City, Indiana, and I'm with an organization called One Region. We represent 3 counties in northwest Indiana, so we are adjacent to the city of Chicago, and our furthest east city is Michigan City, and so it's about 60 miles from Chicago. We also have Lake Michigan. So Lake Michigan, if you are in Michigan City, you can see the skyline of Chicago across the lake. It's only 30 miles across the lake. We're also on the state line with Michigan. So we have a lot going on. Another very interesting thing is that we're actually on Central Time Zone and the rest of Indiana is on Eastern Time Zone, which you would not think is a big deal, but it creates a bit of a rift between us and the state. So I thought I would start with sharing my story. I grew up in Michigan City, and I grew up wanting to leave Michigan City. I was told that there were, as an adult, there would be no opportunities for me in Michigan City. And so my whole life, all I wanted was out of this small town. And I did. I left. As soon as I graduated high school, I went to Denver and then moved to Washington, D.C. And I remember in D.C., I called my dad and I said, I want to come home. I want to quit. And he said, if you come home, there's not going to be anything for you to do here for work. So I stayed in D.C., I ended up moving back to Denver, moved to California. By the time I got to California, I realized, no, I want to go home. And what I saw at home in Michigan City were changes in the downtown. I saw my peers stepping up and getting engaged in the community, and I saw that sense of community. So it's something that we've been talking about today and hearing about, that sense of community. And what I also saw were investments in the quality of place. And that is what drew me back. I was concerned, and I was sharing this with somebody else, I was concerned about two things in moving back. One was the winter, and somebody said to me, Leah, that's why God invented Southwest Airlines, so I felt much more comfortable moving back. And then second was jobs. What was I going to do for work? I mean, my background was in public policy and government affairs, and I was really hesitant about the idea. But I knew that Chicago was there and that I could find a job in Chicago and likely work in live in Northwest Indiana. So we have a commuter rail line that goes into Chicago. It has not seen investments in over 100 years, and we've just now come together to invest in that commuter rail line to decrease the commute time to Chicago. So that's important to us, and that has created a huge momentum for us as a region and for Michigan City as a whole. Michigan City, again, the downtown, we face a lot of the same things that other places face. We had a mall built out further in what we would call the suburbs, but the downtown is going through a revitalization, is on the verge of a renaissance, but challenges with that are creating vibrancy. So how do we get businesses to come in and stay, whether those are stores, restaurants, whatever that may be? Another interesting thing is that because we have so much momentum, those who are local to Michigan City are talking about it a lot and feel a lot of excitement, but there is an issue around perception versus reality. And so a friend of mine who lives in Chicago, he said, yeah, we went on a bachelor party in Michigan City. And I said, oh, that's really great. And he said, yeah, but the downtown was terrible. There's nothing to do. And I understood what he was saying is that, yes, we've turned the corner, but we don't have the vibrancy that you would think a downtown has. So there's this perception versus reality. Like, how far along are we really, and how are we marketing ourselves and talking about ourselves? So that, I think, is an issue of where are we in progress and how do we sell that. Some of our other issues are much what you guys have already talked about schools. The city's doing a lot around supporting the public education. Healthcare is another big issue of, do we have the right healthcare? So if somebody was looking to move to Michigan City, do they feel confident in the doctors or the hospitals that we have? And then, I mean, what I keep hearing over and over again from people who, people do reach out to me and say, I'm interested in moving to Michigan City, but what am I going to do for work? And that's the toughest part of what are you going to do for work. At least we have, a high density of jobs in Chicago, but that's not necessarily going to attract millennials, Gen Xers, really just anybody. So those are our overall issues.
So our Ohio representatives.
Hi, I'm John Molinaro from the Appalachian Partnership for Economic Growth. We're a regional economic development organization that works across the Appalachian counties of Ohio. Most people don't think of Appalachia and Ohio, but Appalachian counties make up a third of the state. 14,000 square miles, 1.2 million people, 6 micropolitan areas, including Athens, Chillicothe, Marietta, Steubenville, Portsmouth, and Zanesville. But our largest micropolitan core, city core, is 28,000. Our largest county is about 110,000. So it's a rugged area. It's been a manufacturing area since the 1820s. The birthplace of the modern polymer and chemical industry, which is still very strong there. It's always been a resource-driven area, and it is still a resource-driven area. We are the heart of the most lucrative natural gas shale play in North America. with a lot of natural gas liquids, which are the feedstock for the chemical and polymers industry, which is revitalizing in the region. So we've had we've got a lot going on in the region. We've had a lot of job growth. It's a time of tremendous potential for us. We're within one truck driving shift to 60% of the US and Canadian population. And we've got excellent highway linkages to that population, and we've got a lot of companies very interested in either expanding current operations, 35 Fortune 500 companies operating manufacturing facilities in our region, and about 27, I think is the latest count, foreign companies that have invested in operations in the region. A lot of opportunity. We've had a really great, since we organized as a regional economic development organization, had never been one 6 years ago, brought about 7,000 new jobs, almost all in manufacturing, into the region. It's been a good run, but what it's done is essentially filled up all of our available desirable facilities. So we're left in a situation where our success is creating some extreme challenges for us in terms of this year of 35 site searches that came through our doors through the end of September. We had 15 for which we couldn't put forward anything even resembling a competitive property. So that's that's been a major challenge and continues to be a challenge. We do have an excellent workforce. It's very highly skilled. It is a little older. We are going to have retirement challenges, but we have, but we're talking a very highly skilled manufacturing workforce that is with still a lot of people unemployed, particularly from the days when the steel industry went down, and losses during the Great Recession in the cabinet manufacturing industry. We lost about 3,000 or 4,000 jobs in that industry during that time. So we've got a lot of skilled people, and 1 in 8 workers in our region goes to a surrounding metropolitan area for work, and most of those folks would like to stay there and get jobs closer to home. So from a standpoint of attracting industry, workforce is really not one of our major issues today. It will be in 5 to 10 years with the aging workforce. So really, you can't sell. I think somebody said something earlier about the issue of having something to sell. Well, we really don't have the product on our shelf to sell, which is, I think, our biggest development issue right now. If you look at the shelves of our store, basically, our region stock of buildings and sites, it looks like a Soviet-era grocery store. What's left is what nobody wanted. It's pretty much picked over. And so, and unfortunately, we're in one of the states that has no funding tool available to communities to support local economic development. So I've got 2 of my micropolitans represented here, 2 more who wanted to come but had to cancel last minute because of urgent community issues. But they have to cobble together a budget and literally compete with whether or not there's going to be Narcan in the sheriff's cruisers for their budget. That's one of our really tough issues. So trying to recruit, retain qualified staff can be difficult in our communities. And there's virtually no source of funding for producing those sites and buildings that companies really want in our region. So that's been a major issue for us. And so, I would say that that's probably the major issue on the industrial development side. From the 6 micropolitans are all very different in terms of other kinds of opportunities that they have and other kinds of challenges. Some have vibrant downtowns like Athens with Ohio universities. Some have very, very struggling downtowns like Steubenville or Portsmouth, which had both had major industries that went out over the last 20 or 30 years, and the downtowns died and haven't come back. So we've got all the challenges everybody's talked about here in different forms among the 6 micropolitans, and all of the sort of opportunities people have talked about in terms of what's working in those communities.
Thank you. So Tupelo.
Good afternoon. I'll make this brief. I'm Mike Claiborne. I'm with the Create Foundation in Tupelo. We cover a 17-county region in northeast Mississippi. We're the oldest and largest community foundation in Mississippi, and really got quite a number of things that we're really proud of in our region. We've got the largest non-metropolitan hospital in America that employs nearly 7,000 people. University of Mississippi and Mississippi State University are less than an hour from Tupelo. Of course, Elvis was born there. You know, as we look at our area, and there are pockets of poverty and decline in population, Tupelo itself actually is doing fairly well. And one of the issues that we clearly see is a disconnect between education and careers. And so not directly workforce training, but again, in our school systems, the best that it gets is one counselor for every 250 to 300 students. And many of the schools, it's one counselor for every 700 or 800 students, which tells you there's not much counseling going on. And so even students that come from families where there's a career role model and high expectations, you know, there's still a challenge in understanding what's out there for me. You then turn to students that are in poverty. How could we expect that they would have any idea of what they might do? And as it's embarrassing to me as somebody that served on the Tupelo School Board for 10 years, that we didn't have more conversations about what are we doing to prepare our students for what they're going to do for the rest of their life. And of course, the system dictates how our schools act in terms of test scores, and that's how they're measured. And that's certainly needed. But kids that are in poverty that don't have a career role model and don't understand the connection between education and what they might do, how are they going to be motivated to do anything? And so we were fortunate about 10 years ago to locate a Toyota manufacturing facility. They build the Corolla just outside of Tupelo. And they established the Toyota Wellspring Education Fund, an unbelievable commitment of $50 million over a 10-year period. So we're in the 8th year of a $5 million commitment from Toyota. We're building a $50 million endowment fund at Create to enhance public education K through 12 in 3 counties. Well, one of the things that developed out of the discussion was, as I described, linking education to careers. And so there are quite a number of things that we're doing to try to do that. But just quickly, one thing that we are really proud of that started 3 years ago was Imagine the Possibilities Career Expo. And so this is not a deal where kids walk around and pick up brochures. It's a highly interactive career expo where really they have the opportunity to sit down and manipulate a $1.8 million Da Vinci surgical robot, all kinds of other interactive things. 150 companies involved. We will have, this past October, we had 7,200 8th graders from 75 school districts in our region. And it has really been phenomenal to see the interaction and connection. The students are only there for 2 hours and 15 minutes, so they've got to get on it and decide where they want to go and the careers that they're interested in. The challenge that I think that we have is to even better prepare the students before they come in terms of what they're going to see and doing some of the career choices, software and that kind of thing, and then the follow-up with them after they've been there. We expect this next year another major initiative to be launched with career coaches, and so we expect to hire probably 25 or 30 career coaches that will actually go into the schools and work with the kids and build on what we're trying to do with the expo and other things. If anybody would be interested in a little booklet that we have that talks about the expo and careers, I have several copies. I'd be happy to share this with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Last, Wilson. So someone from Wilson.
Good afternoon. I'm Grant Goins, City Manager in Wilson. And as everybody else was speaking, I was looking at the list that our group put together of strengths and challenges, and I was checking them off. And so since we're running slow on time, I'll just say to Danville and Macon, ditto. Well, I can pretty much throw this away. But what I do want to point out a couple things I think that might be a little bit unique to Wilson's situation, because I understand that one reason we're here is to learn from each other. So we'd like to share these things. First of all, just so you know proximity, we're about 45 miles east of Raleigh, connected by multi-lane highways with no stoplights, 70-mile-an-hour speed limits, so the commute is quite easy for folks to do. A couple of things that make us unique is we are, it's pretty rare in our country, certainly in North Carolina, for a community, a micropolitan that borders a metropolitan, to be a net in-migration employer. So here we are, 30 to 40-minute drive from one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country, and yet we have a net in-migration of several thousand people a day that come to Wilson to work. So while a lot of you are thinking about how do we attract the jobs, we actually have conversely been figuring out how do we get our best and brightest employees to live here, so that ultimately the employers don't decide, well, if everybody's commuting to the jobs, why don't we just move the jobs? So that's sort of been something that we've really been focusing on. We have a very strong IT sector employment. I mentioned earlier over 1,000 IT jobs in one employer alone. We have a very strong life science cluster, 5+ life science companies, and we have some great jobs, but we also have a problem getting some of those folks to choose to live in our community, particularly the younger. We've talked about millennials, but particularly those, so we're trying to address that. We have significant poverty, 20% approximately, and we have a lot of folks that aren't able to get the type of jobs that we have in our community. If all those in-migration folks were local, we would have the lowest unemployment rate in the room, right? But unfortunately, that's not the case, and we're doing several things as a community to try to address that. We are trying to take advantage of some pretty, I think, bold investments that we've made in infrastructure, the most notable of which we're one of a handful of communities in the Southeast, and maybe less than 100 in the country, that have built a fiber-to-the-home community broadband system. Wilson and Chattanooga were part of the historic FCC decision on that matter. And the day they passed that was the day they also passed net neutrality, so maybe I need to go back up next week and see them take it back away. So we've done a great job with the broadband system, gigabit to every piece of property in our city. We focus so much on building it that we haven't maximized how to take advantage of that. And we are clearly seeing a pattern that these technology workers, they are individuals and they'll make choices, but they also like to have some group dynamics. You have to have critical mass. You have to have things that they're interested in and give them opportunities. So that's a big challenge for us. Probably the one thing I'll leave you with that might help you understand the dichotomy of the benefits and the challenges that we face in Wilson at this time is that it's the only community I'm aware of, maybe some of you are aware of some in your states, but frequently with the great jobs that our Economic Development Office has brought in, but frequently you will find Wilson on the top 10 list in North Carolina for average weekly wage. And when you think about some of the large cities in North Carolina, for Wilson to be on the top 10, that's pretty impressive. And at the exact same time, we can be on the top 10 list for unemployment. So if you think about how does one city get on both lists, then you can begin to see sort of what our challenges are and what our focuses are moving forward. Thanks.
So there are a lot of other thought leaders in the room that don't represent communities. Anybody have any thoughts that they've heard today so far? Things you've heard that you think you've heard a lot before, or things that you haven't heard that you were surprised that you haven't heard? This is a time for you to spend a couple minutes letting us know. We're supposed to be thought leaders now, so yeah. And just tell people who you are.
I'm Julie Seward. I don't know that I'm a thought leader, but I do have a question. I'm really interested because I've not, can you hear me now? Sorry. I'm interested because I haven't heard a lot of conversation about the dynamics of working on a regional level. And I thought that would be sort of a primary piece of conversation you would have. And I think it's an interesting conversation. Where is it working really well? And where is it there's sort of in name only? And where is it simply not there but should be there?
Anybody want to share their regional either success or horror stories?
My name's Andy Kuhn, and I represent one of the small communities within the APEG region. I can tell you that I'm new to the job in there. I came from the Carolinas, moved up from Raleigh in July to Southeast Ohio, and were it not for the efforts of APEG, for what they did for us, we would literally have nothing by way of inventory, understanding of what our product is, understanding of what our best assets are, understanding of any metrics. A lot of these communities have no idea. We're just waiting around. They don't know. They have no idea what to even look for. So on a regional level, thank God somebody stepped in and cobbled together some of those resources for us to help us make more data-driven decisions. And it's a daily progress. We're trying to help educate people so they can figure out what to do with this data we're presenting them with to make a decision to best benefit their community.
Thank you.
Anybody want the other side of it? No, you want a good side too.
Thanks, Rob Riley from the Northern Forest Center up in northern New England, upstate New York. I just gave away my sort of the challenge is that we have a 30 million acre forest that grew up with pulp and paper. The transition of lack of paper overseas has created this decline and a transition of the overall economy over the last 40 years. Our organization, we don't have any micropolitans. We don't get that big. Our largest city is 30,000 people, Bangor, Maine. But where we've seen success is people seeing commonalities of the issues that they face from an economic transition into social, environmental, and then obviously onto the jobs and business development side of things. But our challenge is that we have 4 states we work with. These geopolitical lines come in the way, county lines come in the way of working most effectively on a regional basis. Talk about competition. We're having 2 small states that have 10 counties each, New Hampshire and Vermont, competing with the same Boston market for visitors. So we're not able to rise above and look at policy following business trends and market opportunity. We look at natural resources being defined by geography, markets being defined by geography, and that's not the way business works. So we're trying to rise above that or either go below it to stay out of that fray that tends to divide as opposed to unite us. And I'd say that, knock on wood, we're seeing some opportunities with renewable energy, with building with wood, with water, with carbon markets that sustain our landscape and create jobs that transcend those political boundaries.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
One more comment about regionalism. In Cedar Rapids, we are working closely with our colleagues in Iowa City. It's the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City Corridor Development Corporation. It is painstaking work, and it is painstakingly slow, in large part because the 2 anchor communities are very different. They have very different communities. They have very, very different cultures and political environments. And And so it's hard to find that common denominator. And we're determined and we're proceeding, but it's going to take a long time.
Other thoughts? Yeah. Howdy.
Howdy, Carter. Like our host, I've done a lot of different things, none of them all that well, but a hell of a lot of them. And they've involved everything from the notion of cooperation and economic development to the absolute necessity for a working school system in the public sector, to the necessity for finding a way to take whatever assets you have and make them viable as an economic as opposed to a pretty to look at. I've been in Miami for a long time and ran a foundation there whose chief emphasis was community. And we gave a lot of money to people trying to deal with community. I was in the town of Mississippi for most of my life, which worked on one proposition, which was we were going to survive if we created community in a region that didn't believe that community existed except for white folks. We worked at it very hard. We were the direct beneficiaries, and I use that word correctly, though God knows the program is a disaster, to balance agriculture with industry. 1935, Hugh White, governor of Mississippi, creates what is essentially a giveaway of your resources to outside industry. You don't tax them, you give them the land, and you say, come and be with us for a while and build. You know what? We didn't have anything else to offer. I have to tell you that. And it was successful. In my community, at a certain point in about 1970, we were filled with industries from all over the country, steelworking industries, mills, you name it. And they were independently, seemed to be doing just fine. They required, of course, that we beat the brains out of anybody who looked like a labor union. They required that we make sure that we didn't quibble too much about their low wage rates. And they, of course, didn't want to be told too much about being good about their employment practices when it came to black and white. But there were jobs. They filled up industrial parks. I'm saying all of this because I think at one time or another, in one way or another, my brother, the great innovator, tried an extraordinary venture when he ran another foundation. Each of the things have in fact collapsed. Some of the greatest ideas I ever heard in my life have come and gone. And there's some factors in here which if you don't acknowledge and come to grips with, there's no point in the conversation. The one thing we all know is that government's the enemy. Folks, that's bullshit. When it comes to what we have to do in most places, if you do not have a working relationship with a government which cares about the basic issues, then whatever you do is going to be a joke. And I mean this sincerely. It will be a joke. Because it doesn't matter how much you have, it is as nothing compared to what is required to deal with most of the problems, which have to come from the taxpayer. Oh, I'm sorry, we're losing the taxpayer. I just saw the bills going through. But what I want to say is that you have to know that cooperation has got to begin at a point of education with those you work with in the public sector as well as everything else. I weep every time I go home. It is a ghost city. Every 10 years we lose another 15% of our population. It was a thriving micro town of 50,000 when I left it. It's 32,000 now. God knows what it's going to be in the next census. Nobody in their right mind would stay there. And the only people who stay there are either the aged or the inheritors or those who don't have the capacity to move. I've been listening to your stories, most of which sound sort of dramatically good. As one who worked very hard when I ran Knight Foundation with Macon, I love to hear the strides that have been taken in a town that had desperate places. I worked in a number of your other communities, incidentally, when I was at Knight, and I worked in a number of the communities when I was in politics. When I first went in the foundation world, the old boy who was running Johnson at the time said to me, of course you ought to have partnerships. He says it's more goddamn trouble than it's worth. You've got to have them. You do. But the way I've discovered that partnerships work is not that you go into a loose partnership. You go in and say, we have a venture we are going to jointly fund. We're going to set it over here, and we are going to partner on that thing alone. And we're going to have a governance structure which allows for decision-making, which doesn't require a constant redress to the boards to cry at you for partnering on a project. And we've done that pretty well in several ventures. And I would suggest that if you're going to partner, have a very specific partnership notion of what you want to get out of it, and then be ruthless about governance. A partnership can be, of course, killed in a minute by squabbling partners. I was invited here, as it says, as a retired philanthropist. The least important thing I ever did in my life was to be at Knight Foundation. The most important was to be a newspaper editor in Greenville, Mississippi, in a community, and discovering just how vital community is to life and people, even if the people at the moment don't know it or are not inclined to accept it. So, good for you. Hard at it. Believe me, most of the things we've been talking about are not going to work. But what's not going to work even more is if you don't try them and keep trying. So go to it, kids. God bless you.
Anybody want to try to follow that?